How long do you think the Long Night will actually last in the books? Feel free to leave your beginning of the video guesses down in the comments. How many years do you think the winter will last? This winter that follows a long summer that has been built up for the entire series. Because in the television show, many people were criticizing it for the fact that the Long Night was very short. And in many people's speculations about how the books will end, when they talk about our characters, at the end game of the series, we're talking about our characters as though they may have aged up, just a few years. This is a pretty common thing that I notice when people talk about the end game, right? Like they're talking about, oh, why is some teenage boy gonna be king? What has Bran ever done, right? Well, have you considered the fact that maybe by the end of the Long Night, we're gonna have like 30-year-old King Bran being elected king? If it is in fact a winter that lasts a generation, that seems like about what we should expect. So I imagine you can sort of see the fork in the road we are at here. You either have to go the television show route of having the Long Night be much shorter than it's been built up to be, or you have to go a different route, which will lead to our characters being much older than many people talk about when we generally speculate about the end of this series. Now, when the story hits this fork in the road, I think I know which one we're most likely to go down, and this is based off of just George's original outline for the series, in addition to some of the things that he's told us about his writing process. And that thing he told us is the fact that at one point he had the idea of a 5-year gap, which he removed, and that sort of explains why so many of these characters, who are our main characters in the story, seem really, really young for the things that they're doing. Initially, he had expected many of them for at least the middle portion of the series to be at least 5 years older. That would also mean that in his endgame, he probably expects his characters to be older. And we get confirmation of this with a leaked original outline for the series that he gave when he was trying to basically sell the idea. He refers to the story as a generational tale, where this generation of children is going to grow into adults, changing themselves and the world in the process. This is kind of one of the ideas of generational change that I've been driving home in the series, trying to get people to look at the story through this lens. In this story of generational change, it seems like it will likely be on some level out with the old ways and in with new ways. At least an adaptation of the old ways that makes them better suited for serving humanity and serving a better world. But the most interesting line for what we're talking about here in terms of how long the Long Night will be is how these characters are expected to grow from children to adults in the process of the story. I think it's pretty likely that George R.R. Martin has a very long night planned for us. In fact, if he was viewing these characters as adults in his endgame the entire time, when he was scrapping the 5-year gap originally, he might have just said to himself, well, this is fine, they'll be a little bit young for the middle portion of the series, but all I have to do is make the Long Night 5 years longer. And then all of a sudden, he's completely caught up to where his character should be in age range for what he was planning at the end of the series. So while our story so far may have only covered a few years of in-world time as these characters age, I think there's a pretty good chance that the final 2 books, that pace is going to change dramatically, and they may cover roughly 10 or 20 years. This would leave our main point of view characters like Bran, Jon, and Dany conveniently roughly the same age as characters like Ned and Cat were at the beginning of the story, so we get that sort of entire perspective on them being that age, and then what are they going to do as adults. That would make a lot more sense than sort of having them all be, a couple years older than they are right now, which is just one of these little factors that sort of seems absent from a lot of the discussion around the endgame and how these character arcs are going to play out. Again, I may have been a little bit ahead when I said, Bran could be 35 years old or whatever it was, but he could be 25. I mean, that's not unreasonable. That's a fairly short Long Night compared to what old Nan talks about in her stories. So Bran being Ned's age when he is elected king is actually a pretty reasonable take, in my opinion. There could be a situation where Winds of Winter ends on a cliffhanger that is appropriately set up for there to be a sort of like he had planned before, multiple year gap, where it's just like the beginning of Dream of Spring comes back with chapters that are covering what had happened over the last 5 years. Or it could be sort of like the chapter where Bran is in Bloodraven's cave, and George is just constantly using the moon to keep time, and showing us that months and months are passing in this single chapter. There could be a lot of chapters like that in the later books, And therefore, once winter has hit, it could be the case that, each chapter is just moving the story along a lot quicker than any of the previous chapters ever have. The only way I can really see getting around this, the idea of a truly long night that has to be lasting long enough to be, worthy of all the buildup, is if there is some really dramatic way that it is ended early. And, considering I think the idea would be that the long night may never end without the actions of our characters, there will probably be some big dramatic end to it. But again, how disappointed would you be if, that end came 3 years into the winter, right? If we have all of this buildup, all of this worry about a long, long night, and it lasts 2 or 3 years, and everyone's mostly fine, well, that's probably not the route George is going to go, in my opinion. But again, I'm interested to hear you guys, sort of debate back and forth if you think there's merit to either of these directions that this could go. The other thing I would love some comments on is all of the potential for character development and story that we would get if you suddenly realized that this story may have 15 years left to go, right? Rickon could grow into an entire adult and be like a whole person by the end of this series. Many of the rushed developments of the late season of the television show could be actually given the appropriate amount of time. Specifically, Jon and Dany's love story is probably the chief among them. If the two of them perhaps have to spend a long extended period of time trapped in a castle together, well, that's probably a lot more of a chance for true romance and less of a quick thing like what we got in the television show. Now, the relationship between Jon and Dany is going to be one of the major points of the entire series, in my opinion, and one of the most important episodes of this series, which is going to be coming out soon, is going to focus entirely around where I think the relationship between Jon and Dany is going to go, and sort of try to make sense of some of the things that we saw in Season 8. The easiest way to make sure you don't miss it when that video comes out is to hit like and subscribe on this video right now. Another romance that could actually potentially be given its proper time would be Arya and Gendry if they are also trapped together for the long night. Now, there's a lot of speculation there, and I am also, as I said, very interested to hear if there's any speculation you guys could do about what characters would be very interesting if this series does in fact go another 15 years rather than another 4 or 5, and what sort of things you think that those characters might be getting up to. Now, if you've been following this series, one of the things that I have speculated is going to be very important to ending the long night is potentially the rebirth of a new world tree, which is a thing that, could take years and years to grow. So this could sort of all be a situation where, yes, the long night itself is going to genuinely be a long night, even if there is a magical solution to the entire thing. George R.R. Martin is not going to let the characters off the hook so easily with an instant stab to the Night King on, night, 7 of the Long Night, we'll say. Right, because it is a little unfair to say the Long Night only lasted one night, as some people like to joke, right? It was the others took some time to get down to Winterfell. They were wiping out castles in the north first. They had that whole incident with Ned Umber's body strapped up to a wall. They had to burn him and, that whole spiral symbol. The Long Night did last, at least a couple weeks in the television show, but I don't think that that's the route that George R.R. Martin's going to go. I think he's going to have a magical solution to the problem, but it's probably going to be some part of this cycle of rebirth and a return to green magic, a birth of new ways for the world that are better than these old ways that they're going to leave behind. So I am really hoping this one will generate some interesting discussion to take a look at down in the comments, people going back and forth about which direction they think this could go, true long night or a short long night with a quick magical solution. If you have any other really interesting character developments that could take place if there's a true long night, definitely let me know. And definitely make sure to like and subscribe. As I said, if you've made it this far into this discussion, you're really going to like the few discussions that I have planned next. So I'm going to cut this video here and go work on those. I will see you with something else very soon.